Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. It's Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I will be reviewing the Nemesis, which is one of the tanks to come out with the Warhammer 40k collaboration inside World of Tanks console. If you haven't already guessed by the looks of this tank, it is a version of the E100. The Nemesis is a Mercenary premium tier 10 tank destroyer, whereas the E100, which this tank is based off of, is a super heavy German Tech Tree tier 10 heavy tank. So it's the same shape, but it does differ in the form of its ammunition and also a little bit in terms of its armor profile. And in today's video, I'll go over all of the stats of the Nemesis for you. Over here on Excel, we're going to be comparing to the E100 itself and also the American Tech Tree tier 10 tank destroyer, the T-124, and the Object 268 version 5, which is a premium Soviet tier 10 tank destroyer. So a good indication of how the Nemesis holds up in terms of its stats. All of these have high caliber guns and they play a little bit like a hybrid heavy tank slash tank destroyer. So we're first going to skip over and have a look at the price of this vehicle. And of course you can get it in this Warhammer 40,000 mega bundle with all of the commanders and the emblems and inscriptions and the tanks themselves for that crazy price of 63,000 gold. And if you love Warhammer and you love World of Tanks console, it might just be worth it, but it's a hell of a lot of money. Around £180 sterling, $220, something like that. It's an insane price. So a lot of players are just going to want to get one tank out of the selection, maybe a couple if you're able to afford it, and the Nemesis might be one that people pick up. But for the main price of 22,750 gold, I'm not so sure it's worth it at all for that price. That's an insane price even for a premium tier 10 heavy tank destroyer, I should say. If you wanted to get it with a discount, all you have to do is work through the ops that are currently going on, and you can earn this tank at a 15, 30 or 50% discount. The 15% discount is 19,500 gold. With a 30% discount, it makes the Nemesis 16,000 gold, and with a 50% discount, 11,400 gold. And if you're able to work your way through the ops and get that 50% discount, I'd say for 11,400 gold, if you like this playstyle, you like high caliber guns, maybe you love the E100 and T124, that might be a good price for you. But we're going to head on over to Excel and have a look at the stats of the Nemesis. We are comparing it again to the E100, the T124 and the Object 268 version 5. To start off with, let's have a look at the XP bonus, as the Nemesis and the Object 268 version 5 are premium tanks. They have a 5% tank XP bonus, whereas obviously the Tech Tree tier 10s won't have any bonus at all. Next, let's start off with the raw stats in terms of the hit points. As a tank destroyer, the Nemesis has 2,100 hit points, way off the best in this comparison, which is the E100, a super heavy tank at 2,700 hit points, so 600 off of the E100, but it is in line with the other tank destroyers in this comparison. You have 100 more hit points than the E4 and 200 more than the Object 268 version 5, and you definitely need those extra couple hundred hit points because although the armor is still pretty thick on the Nemesis, a lot of it on the turret is flat, your lower plate is flat, and you are a giant tank to hit, so your hit points won't last too long, so you definitely have to try and angle as best you can, and I'll try and show you that during the gameplay. Next, in terms of the view range, the Nemesis has a horrific 360 meters view range. If you want to be able to spot for yourself, you're going to want to do everything you can in the setup to improve your view range, but I've chosen basically just to go into the battles blind and hope I'm able to get into the brawling locations and invest in the DPM and the gun handling itself. 360 meters base view range, 40 meters worse than the best in this comparison, which is the E100, and it's still 30 meters less than the E4 and the Object 268 version 5 respectively, so definitely watch out for that. You will get outspotted very easily in the Nemesis. Next, we come on to the mobility, and as the Nemesis is a form of the E100, you have the same 1200 horsepower engine. You do have a slightly better power to weight at 10.82. Your top forward speed is 30 kilometers an hour, the same as the E100, and the reverse speed is 15 kilometers an hour, which is the same as the E100. And in terms of your hull and turret traverse, they do differ from the E100 slightly. The hull traverse on the Nemesis is 24 degrees a second, so 2 degrees better than the E100, but you have 2 degrees worse turret traverse at 18 degrees a second, whereas the E100 has 20 degrees a second turret traverse. So that 18 degrees on the turret is pretty slow. You do have to watch out for that when tanks are trying to circle you, and just make sure you're keeping an eye on the minimap and your close surroundings. Try not to let light tanks and medium tanks circle you, because that is pretty poor. However, with gun handling skills, you can increase that by a fair bit. So in terms of a comparison between all of these vehicles, you can see here that the engine power goes to the E100 and the Nemesis at 1200, but it doesn't necessarily correlate to the power to weight. The Object 268 version 5 as a lighter vehicle has a 15 power to weight, so the best in this comparison. Next is the E4, and the E100 and Nemesis are lagging behind, with the Nemesis only slightly beating the E100 in terms of its power to weight, so it'll get up hills ever so slightly quicker than the E100 will. In terms of your top forward speed, the E100 and Nemesis are at the bottom here in terms of this comparison, whereas the E4 can go 35 kilometers an hour and the version 5 a pretty hefty 48 kilometers an hour. In terms of reverse speed, it has the joint best at 15 kilometers an hour, better than the E4's 10 kilometers an hour in reverse. And you have to bear in mind that the E4 does not have a fully rotational turret like the E100, the Nemesis, and the Object 268 version 5. In terms of the hull traverse, the Nemesis is in line with the E100 and the E4, but the Object 268 version 5 beats it in that regard. And in terms of your turret traverse, 2 degrees a second less than the E100 and E4, and it's 4 degrees a second less than the version 5, so the mobility's not brilliant. You have a power to weight ratio which is better than the E100, decent reverse speed, and you can get that turret traverse up if you invest in gun handling skills on your commander, and I'll show you how that works in just a little bit. Next, we're going to get on to the guns of these tanks, and of course that's the most interesting aspect of most of the tanks. Usually the Nemesis has what's called a battle cannon. It doesn't actually list its gun caliber, but I assume it's the same as the E100, so a 150mm gun. On the Nemesis, you fire AP as your standard ammunition. You have a premium APCR round, and you have a third AP round, so a little bit different than the other tanks in this comparison. So your AP rounds on the Nemesis have a speed of 950 meters a second, a penetration of 280 millimeters for 700 alpha damage, so that's 50 less than the standard rounds on the E100. Your premium rounds on the Nemesis are APCR rounds with a slightly better shell velocity at 1020 meters a second, with the same 280 millimeters of penetration, but your alpha damage jumps up by 175 to 875, so a nice massive hit there if you manage to penetrate. And if you high roll, you can get up to around 1,000 or in the high 900s, which feels really, really nice. And differing from the E100, your third round is that AP round with 890 meters a second. Again, the same 280 millimeters of penetration, so all three of these rounds have the same penetration. But your alpha damage drops to 350, and that's because this round fires a lot quicker than the other two rounds, so good for those engagements where you want to finish off a tank after you have slapped them with your first shell or your second shell. In terms of your premium APCR, to get that better alpha damage and shell velocity and keep that 280 millimeters of penetration, you do lose a little bit of DPM compared to your standard round, but not by too much, and we'll have a look at that in just a second. So in terms of comparing all of these guns, the E100 has the same 150mm gun, the E4 has a 155mm gun, and the version 5 has a 152mm gun. As you can see by the highlighted in green here, the standard AP rounds on the Nemesis have the best shell velocity out of all of these tanks, so that's good at sniping at mid to long ranges. Just bear in mind you will lose a little bit of penetration over distance and quite a lot with your APCR rounds. In terms of your alpha damage, it is the lowest on any standard round in this comparison, with the E4 and version 5 coming out on top. In terms of your premium rounds here, you do have the worst penetration as you don't have access to any heat rounds or high penetration APCR like the E4, but you do have the best alpha damage at 875, which is better than the 850 on the E4 and version 5, so that's a plus point for the Nemesis. And lastly, you do have a third round which is better than an HE round in my opinion, because you have that 280mm of penetration. You have good shell velocity at 890 meters a second, and although you do have that low alpha damage, you have a shell which is able to penetrate and you reload relatively quickly as well, whereas the other tanks in this comparison have obviously less penetration but whopping alpha damage, like on the E4 and version 5 at 1100 with 90mm of penetration. So yeah, it's a little bit unique in that regard, and it can come in handy in certain scenarios. Sometimes it would be nice to have those HE rounds to penetrate lightly armoured targets, but it's nice to have 280mm of pen again. Just a shame you don't have any really high penetration premium rounds, so when you're facing other super heavy tanks like the Mouse or E100, you can struggle to penetrate them if they are angling their tank correctly. Next, we're going to have a look at the gun handling and DPM and the gun depression and elevation of these tanks. Then we'll have a little look at my commander and equipment setup and the armour of the Nemesis. So in terms of the aim time, it's unfortunately the worst in this comparison at 3.1 seconds, a little bit worse than the Object 268 version 5 and E4, and a lot worse than the E100's 2.7 seconds. However, once you are aimed in, you do have the best accuracy, or the joint best accuracy, I should say, with the Object 268 version 5 at 0.36. And if you invest in a setup which is focused on DPM and gun handling, you can get it down to a very nice level indeed. So now we're going to have a look at the rates of fire, the reloads and the DPM of all of the rounds on the Nemesis. So on your first shell, which is the AP rounds for 700 damage, it's 3.03 rate of fire. On your premium APCR rounds for 875 damage, it's 2.43 rounds a minute. And in terms of your third shell, which is the 350 alpha damage round, 6.06 rounds a minute. What does that mean in terms of your reloads? Well, your first shell, 19.8 seconds base reload. Your second shell, 24.7 seconds base reload, and for that 350 alpha damage, a base reload of 9.9 seconds. And that equates to, in terms of DPM, 2,121 DPM on your standard AP rounds. On your premium APCR, 2,064.7 DPM. And on your third shell, 2,121 DPM, so the same as your standard shell. So the only benefit of having that third shell with the less alpha damage is to fire quickly after you've slapped someone to finish them off with that 350 alpha damage with a reduced reload. So in terms of comparing to the other tanks in this comparison, in terms of the reload, you can see here that the version 5 has the best reload at 18.8 seconds, but the Nemesis does beat the E100 and is only slightly worse than the E4. In terms of DPM, it's the worst in this comparison. It is off the E100 by over 100, and it is massively worse than the E4 and the 268 version 5, which is the best in this comparison at 2,712. So definitely watch out for that when you're getting into those engagements. You want to trade 1 for 1 if you can with the high alpha damage APCR, and you want to try and play very carefully when you're coming up against tanks that have good DPM, because this definitely hasn't got good DPM even with those low alpha damage rounds. Lastly, in terms of ammo capacity, you have the joint best at 50 with the E100, much better than the E4 and version 5. And you also have the joint best gun depression and the joint best gun elevation at 7 degrees and 20 degrees respectively, whereas the E4 has 6 degrees of gun depression and the version 5 has 5 degrees. And the E4 has 12 degrees of gun elevation and the version 5 has 15 degrees of gun elevation. So a bonus there for the Nemesis and for the E100. So now we're going to have a look at my commander and equipment setup and what I've been running in the gameplay you're going to see in just a bit, and how that affects the stats of the Nemesis. So in terms of the consumables, I'm running large med, large repair kit and the combat rations. And in terms of the equipment, I'm running the advanced optics to boost up my view range, ventilation to help with the view range, DPM and gun handling, an advanced loader to help the DPM out and try and get it to a good level. And in terms of my commander skills, I'm running 6th Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Run and Gun, Clutch Braking and Off-Road Driving. So those last two to help the mobility of the Nemesis out a little bit as you are relatively sluggish turning. Run and Gun and all of the other gun handling skills just to help the gun handling out as much as possible, because when I have this poor DPM but high alpha, I want to make sure I'm penetrating and hitting every shot that I'm firing if I'm able to. Rapid Loading to help the DPM out, and 6th Sense and Born Leader as standard on every one of my commanders. And as you can see, I'm running one of the new 3D commanders that comes out with the Warhammer 40k collaboration, the Volusad Thassaeus commander. Pretty evil looking commander there. So what does that mean in terms of the stats of the Nemesis? Well, it's boosted my view range to a still pretty poor 438 meters, and if you wanted to boost that up even more, you can run situational awareness on your commander, but I found that it doesn't really help me out an awful lot. You're a super heavy tank with horrific concealment. You're going to get outspotted by a lot of tanks, and just try not to get into spots where you need to spot for yourself. Or sometimes it's not possible to get into situations where that's not a necessity, but I try and invest it in other areas, like in helping the mobility and the DPM. In terms of my hull and my turret traverse, they have improved with the gun handling skills and the mobility skills. So my hull traverse has improved to 26.25 degrees a second, and my turret traverse has gone from 18 to 22.43 degrees a second. So that does help when tanks are trying to get around you. In terms of the aim time, it's improved to 2.8 seconds, and the accuracy has gone down to a fantastic 0.28, which means that when you do aim in, and it takes a while, that 2.8 seconds, you are pretty damn accurate, and this gun feels really nice, and it hits a lot of shells, and it hits very hard, especially if you're firing that premium APCR. In terms of the reload, it is now 14.08 seconds on my standard AP for that 700 alpha damage. It's now 17.57 seconds for that 875 damage with the premium APCR. And my third round for that 350 alpha damage, 7.04 seconds. So very useful to follow up a massive slap with a shell for 350 damage to finish off low health targets. And what does that mean in terms of my DPM? Well, my standard DPM and my third shell DPM is 2,982, and the premium APCR DPM has gone from 2,064.7 to 2,903.6, so that has boosted that up quite well indeed. Next, we're going to have a look at the armour of the Nemesis, and I'm going to take you to tanks.gg and the armour profile of the E100, but don't be fooled, the Nemesis does not have the same armour profile as the E100, so you have to listen when I'm talking. I'll try and put some screenshots up on screen of the armour profile of the Nemesis for you, and we'll see just how different it is from the E100. So we're going to focus now on the front of the turret of the Nemesis, and this is a lot thinner than the E100 turret. So the E100 turret has 270mm of armour all around here, whereas the Nemesis has 240mm. So if you're looking at the E100 or the Nemesis dead on, the E100 would have around 310mm of effective armour on the front of the turret. You're going to have to take about 30mm off that for the Nemesis, so around 270mm of effective armour when you're looking at the Nemesis like this. And if it's angling its turret like that, when someone's trying to shoot at your turret, you're going to be looking at, instead of having 330mm of effective armour, of having around 300mm of effective armour, going up to sort of 310mm of effective armour on the other side of the turret. So definitely bear that in mind. In terms of your lower plate, or your upper plate I should say, on the Nemesis it's 150mm, whereas on the E100 it is 200mm here. So this part here on the Nemesis is 150, so a lot weaker than on the E100, which means when you're looking at the Nemesis like this into its gun, instead of having 360mm of effective armor, you have got around 330mm here. And if it's angling like this, you will have sort of around 380mm. So still a pretty thick upper plate, but definitely be warned, it's thinner than this one here, the E100. And that's the same as the lower plate. The lower plate on the E100 is 150, the same as the Nemesis. So if you're looking at the lower plate of the Nemesis, you need around 265mm to go through like this. And if it's angling at a sort of 45-degree angle, you are going to need around 300mm of penetration to go through. Next, one of the worst parts of the Nemesis is the fact that you have a 70mm or you have 70mm of side armor, whereas as you can see here, the E100 has 120mm of side armor, including the 60mm of spaced armor. So the E100 is fantastic for side scraping, and the Nemesis is still pretty good for side scraping. However, if you over angle, this part of your tank becomes very weak, and that has caught me out and off guard before I even looked at the armor value of this tank. I just took it straight out onto the battlefield, over angled by accident, and got penetrated through the rear here. Whereas if you're over angling in the E100, you can see here that you can over angle quite a long way, and it's still pretty damn thick at the back. But when you over angle like this in the Nemesis, you are exposing yourself to higher caliber and higher penetration rounds, so definitely watch out for that. So that's the main takeaways you want to think about in terms of the Nemesis. It's very similar to the E100 in terms of a lot of its armor, but it does differ in the side armor, the turret armor, and this part of the upper plate armor, this section here. And I will have put screenshots up of the thicknesses of the Nemesis armor for you over this, so you can compare it to the E100. There is a banding here on the Nemesis of 115mm, where it's 150 here on the E100. So the top part of the upper plate of the Nemesis is a lot worse than the E100, so definitely something to take into consideration. You still have some side skirt armor here, 30mm on the Nemesis, but here on the E100 it is 60mm, so it will protect less against heat rounds and absorb less of your HE damage when it gets fired into this side skirt on the Nemesis. So definitely take that into consideration. So I hope that helps in terms of the armor on the Nemesis. It's weaker than the E100, which isn't great to begin with, so you've got to try and angle your turret like this and wiggle it when people are shooting at your turret to get the most out of that sort of slope backwards turret on the Nemesis. You do have that 7 degrees of gun depression to improve your turret armor a little bit, and there is this bar here which can be hit 150mm on the E100, and on the Nemesis I believe it's only 65mm of armor, rising to around 100mm, so very easy to penetrate here. If you're above this tank, you can aim for this, and it's a nice shot to shoot. A nice place to shoot if you're fighting it with a tier 8 vehicle. So that's it for the armor of the E100 and the Nemesis, because of course that does differ slightly. We're now going to go over and head into the first of 3 gameplays, and there'll be a little clip at the end showing the E100 or the Nemesis doing a little bit of tank destroyer activity. So I'll see you in the first gameplay in just a little bit. So welcome to the first gameplay of today's video. We are here on Fisherman's Bay in the Nemesis. I'm going to load up a premium APCR round because I don't mind losing a little bit of silver whilst I'm playing in a tank that is meant to be for fun basically. We're going to head to the mid-ridge. It's a team destruction battle, meaning there are no artillery to pull on me, so I can go kind of half hull down on this mid-ridge, and if someone's aiming at the flat parts of my turret, which are obviously to the left, right and underneath the gun, I'm going to angle it 40 to 45 degrees and just hope they ricochet. And sometimes it's a little bit futile if people are firing premium rounds at you, especially heat rounds or tier 10, tier 9, 10 tank destroyer premium rounds. You're just going to get butchered. But you've got to try and do everything you can to get people to bounce off your turret, upper plate, or to get your shots absorbed into your side skirts and your tracks. So we've got our shell loaded by the time we're here because we've invested our setup in making the DPM and gun handling as good as we can, whilst also improving the mobility by a little bit. We miss a chance there on that T50-41, but we're just going to bide our time, and it's all about picking the right moment, hitting your shot, falling back, getting the reload, and doing it over and over again. You don't want to expose yourself too often in the Nemesis because of that lack of armor compared to the E100, and it also doesn't have great DPM, so when you fire you want to make every shot count. There's a Badger up here, which is a very dangerous tank to come up against because that has fantastic superstructure armor, and if you can get into a hold down location, we could be in some trouble here with the good or decent penetration that Tank Destroyer has. It's not brilliant, but enough to go through our turret. We bounce one off of him, so we're going to keep an eye on him, but we've still got to try and keep in the fight. And we're okay in the field here at the moment because there are no artillery, and we slap a shot there. We don't fully aim it, but we just pray to the RNG guards and it goes in. We high roll for 921 damage, and these premium rounds really do slap. If you use a lot of them, you can lose a little bit of silver in a battle because they are around, I think it's 5,600 silver, but don't quote me on that. I'll try and put that up now on screen if that's completely incorrect. So if you don't like losing your silver, load as many AP rounds as you can, but for me, I carry a hefty sum of these premium rounds to do things like that to Badgers. Not actually Badgers, the tank that's called the Badger. Anyway, I'm digressing, but we're already up to 1700 damage in 2 shots, and although your DPM isn't great, you don't need to have fantastic DPM when you hit this hard. If you pick your right moments, try and go to the locations where there's going to be brawling action going on, and you play like you would an E100 with that high 750 alpha damage, except you have the option to shoot these premium rounds and have 870 alpha and high roll for over 900, nearing 1000, and then you can quickly switch to those third rounds to finish off low health targets. It took me a while to get used to switching to that third round if there was a target on sort of 300 or less health to finish them off. Because the DPM is the same between the third and the premium rounds, and the standard AP I should say, you can get fooled into thinking they're completely useless, but because of that lower reload, you can have the opportunity to take out low health targets after you've just slapped someone if you quickly think to switch to that third round. It took me a while in my play session, but I eventually got to grips with it, and I think you might see that towards the end of the second or third gameplays in today's video. But we took a little bit of damage there as that light tank came round us. We tried to take him out of the game. We put a nice big shot into him, but I think he managed to escape and then subsequently get taken out. So he's finally getting taken out with the assistance of our big hit. We are aiming in as long as possible on this 780, trying to go for this side there, go through the kind of side to the driveway, and we should penetrate quite easily here. But the accuracy is letting us down, even though we've improved it quite dramatically. Sometimes it can still be a little bit derpy, but that 780 is in a relatively good hold down location for that tank. And we're just going to wait for him now to turn his turret, and we can go straight through the side. And it was third time lucky there. And we're now up to 3,420 direct damage and 1,043 assistance. And even though the view range isn't great, on the maps where they aren't too big and heavy tanks are sat out in the open, like that 780, it means that we are able to get a little bit of assistance for ourselves. And if you go to those hotly contested areas, you are able to pick up the assistance as well as tracking your targets. Again, they're not fully aimed, but we managed to hit that because of the gun handling we have invested into with our setup. On that IS-7, I'm going to actively use my combat rations here to boost the DPM as much as possible, try and get another shot into this IS-7 and hopefully deal a nice lot of damage, another 830 odd damage, so low rolling a little bit there with the premium APCR, but I mainly use these rounds for most of the battle because it's the same penetration but just higher alpha damage and an ever so slightly worse DPM, and I'm happy to have that for those massive high rolls there. So on Fisherman's Bay we finish in 4th spot there with 5k direct damage, 1,043 assistance. We block 930 damage and we make a profit with a premium account but a 30,000 loss without. And we're now going to head on into the second gameplay. So welcome to the second gameplay of today's video. We are here in the Nemesis and we are on Kaunas. The first minute and a half has just consisted of us getting into position where we can overlook this north to northeastern flank. We eventually find out who has been out spotting us, that T62A, and we put a nasty 854 damage into him with a premium APCR round, and then we're reloaded again to try and slap someone else with this very dangerous round. We bounce around off of that T62A, probably firing the APCR rounds, and we were angled slightly, so it's a nice tank in my opinion. I like the E100. I don't hate it as much as a lot of other players do. The armor's not brilliant, but it's enough to bounce a fair few rounds to keep you in the battle. You do have that 2,100 hit points here, which you don't have the 2,700 that's on the E100, so it's going to feel a little bit less durable, but the skin's pretty awesome. I like the glowing blue around the muzzle on the gun, and I do like having these premium APCR rounds that slap for 875 damage. You're going to see me here just bide my time. There's a Centurion AVRE there, and I don't want to get smashed in the side, because depending on what round that tank's firing, probably just going to splash me for like 400 to 600 damage, and I really don't want to take that at the start of the battle. So we're going to aim up nicely. Shell velocity is not too bad on those premium rounds at 1020 meters a second, and we take out that batch at 25 TAP, and that's when it's nice having that high alpha damage gun to finish off targets that are sort of 400 to 600 health. I could have done it with the AP rounds, and there is an argument for maybe in an equipment slot running the advanced reloader where you can switch shell without time penalty, but it would only really be useful to switch out for something like the third round if you want to finish off a low health target, or the first round if you know you can penetrate and you don't need the higher alpha damage. But there's not really many instances when I felt like the need to switch like you do in other tanks that fire Hesh and things like that, so I use the equipment slot to try and improve the view range, but of course you can tweak it how you wish. So here on Kaunas we are up to 2.5k direct damage, and we've blocked 320 damage. That Centurion AVRE meets us. He whiffs his shot as we track him in the open and slap him as well, getting some nice assistance here. We've loaded our third shell for that faster reload to try and finish him off, but I aim like a complete tit, and yeah, we don't manage to take him out, but fortunately he gives us his side. We do low roll, leaving him on 123 damage, and hopefully he will be taken out, and once he's taken out, I'm either going to advance through here and try and support our tanks in the north, or I'm going to swing round and try and defend our capture circle from the south. So it's a relatively close game at the moment, and now we're going to try and take out this Centurion. We comes over, his hull dips down so we can go through the upper plate, and we manage to put one into him. I try and angle for that 257, but he manages to go through us. So we put one through him with the third shell, tracking him in place. We're going to angle up a little bit. He bounces off us there. We're getting tracking assistance, and I'm loading this premium APCR shell to deal that nice, hopefully killing blow. And there's a chance if we high roll here we can take him out, but we don't need to, as he gets shot up by one of our teammates and we take him out of the battle. So we're up to 4 kills already, 4.7k direct damage, 968 assistance, and 1,100 blocked, showing you it's a pretty good all-round tank. It's just like an E100, less hit points with a higher alpha damage shell. You don't have access to those heat rounds that the E100 has, but you've got a cool looking skin. You're a little bit faster up hills, and if you like that playstyle, you're probably going to like this tank. It's definitely not worth it for the actual price of this tank, but with a discount, with the 50% discount, I would say it's definitely worth it if you like your E100 and you like the skin, you like the collaboration, and you like the E100. So we've decided to come around the south here to defend the base from, I'm guessing, some tanks that have now switched their attentions back towards their base as our tanks have pushed around the north. So I'm going to push up, try and get a bit of damage into an unsuspecting tank, and then fall back. The medium that is sat at our base has said he's on his way, and hopefully that's to come and help us. So we come up against a Nemesis there. Didn't need that APCR. That's when an advanced reloader would have come in handy. I could have just switched to either an AP first shell or the third AP round and finished that Nemesis off. And now we're just going to reverse up. The enemy know we are here, so hopefully we can bait them this way, and by the time we've baited them round, we will have the assistance of our teammate behind us. So I'm reversing out of harm's way with the relatively decent 15 kilometers an hour reverse speed. We put a nice shell there into the tracks of that Nemesis. We penetrate, but he sets us on fire, so very unfortunate for us. So that's just going to repair our tracks there, keep going. Our engine gets repaired, but it burns out and gets damaged as well. So we're going to reverse out round this corner. We're now on 639 hit points, so we are definitely a one-shot for that Nemesis, depending on what round he is firing, and we're going to try and side scrape off of this building. And in this game, I hadn't really checked the side armour, I just assumed it was the same as the E100. I knew the turret armour was slightly different, but not the whole, the actual side of the hull. And we're going to find out very quickly that it is different than the E100. Not in this instance, but the next time we side scrape, we are going to make a massive error, and you're going to see it's going to result in a spoiler alert in my demise. And as you can see, it's a very close game, so I could have gone on to have an even better game in this game if I had actually looked up the side armor of this tank and knew that if I over angled my side, I would likely be taken out of the game. So we're going to come up now. We are down by one tank, so I have to try and make a little bit of a push. IS-7 was waiting for us. He bounces off the dead wreck of the Nemesis. We put one into him. The artillery is aiming at us in this location. I'm just trying to stick as close by these buildings as possible. Unfortunately, we do get blind fired by the artillery. And then I was side scraping out against that E100, and I was thinking, where the hell did he pen me? And it's just through my side because I was over angling to where he was, and I didn't realise that the side armour just isn't as good as the E100. You can side scrape against pretty much every gun calibre you're going to come up against, but if you over angle like I did there, you will get taken out of the battle very quickly. So that's it for my part in this battle. We're going to skip to the end to see whether my team managed to pull it off, but because I've already given you the spoiler alert, you probably know the outcome. So let's skip to the end and see how we did. So we unfortunately don't manage to pick up a victory there, but we still finish with a fairly nice result for the Nemesis. Sniper medal, first class, finished top of our team with 5 kills, 6.6k direct damage and 968 assistance. So yeah, definitely look up the stats of your tanks, kids, before you go out into battle, because you might overangle and get yourself taken out in a very close game, but that's still a fairly decent result, and I was fairly happy with that game. So we're now going to head on into the third and final battle of today's video. So we are now on Siegfried line in the Nemesis in the third and final gameplay of today's video. This is an assault battle and we are defending an assault here on Siegfried line, and it's a pretty good map for the Nemesis. The view range won't matter too much because we can just defend this part of the map from the enemy advance. So we've loaded a premium round to start with. It seems a bit kind of scummy-ish to just load the premium rounds, but they've just got that really juicy alpha damage, and it's so nice, especially for starting off a battle like we did there, where we smack that poor object 140 for over 930 damage. We set him on fire, we take him out of the battle. That's 1 kill for us, and we're up to 1283 damage. Yeah, in the first minute of the battle already, just with 1 shell. So there's an object 268 version 5, which we compared this tank to in front of us. So I'm going to use the hard cover to try and hide my lower plate and my upper hull, and I can hopefully just side scrape, peek round when he's fired, come over here like we're doing here and getting a shot into him, and then falling back. And for the moment, I'm just loading these premium APCR rounds, and when there's a target that needs taken out with the third round with the lower reload but the lower alpha damage as well, or the faster reload and lower alpha damage I should say, we'll load that round and hopefully take that vehicle out. But for the moment we're just going to keep slapping with these premium APCR rounds. I don't have the need for the slightly improved DPM of the first or third shell right at the moment. We're not getting sort of swarmed or swamped by the enemy team. We do have some teammates close by, a Death Star in front of us and a medium and tank destroyer behind us. And we can just keep hopping forward, getting a shell in, slapping them and falling back. And if your team's set up correctly here on Siegfried line, defending the assault's pretty easy, especially if you've got tanks like medium tanks or any kind of tank with gun depression or a little bit of gun depression. You can just protect these ridge lines right in front of you like we are doing. We're up to 3k damage in the first 3 minutes of today's battle, and as we poke forward we get a little bit of assistance there. Got to be a bit careful that FE 4005 doesn't get damaging shell into us from where he is sat to the right, but we're going to come around now and see if we cannot get a shell right up into the lower plate of that Type 4 heavy. Make sure we shoot when he was angled upwards so his angle's worse, and we managed to take him out of the battle. If I had loaded the third round there, I might have got a shell into that Type that T49 I should say, but it doesn't really matter. I'm carrying on with these APCR rounds, and you're going to find that a lot of players in these tanks are going to do the exact same thing. You don't lose a lot of DPM, but you gain that massive 875 damage, and that can really be a massive influence, especially later on in the battle, because you're severely crippling tanks. And here we're going to snap our gun round, and we snap a shell there really quickly into that T49, and I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't invest into the gun handling with my equipment and commander setup, and improving the turret and gun rotation speed there, which helped us slap that light tank, and he's going to think twice before coming to mess with the might of the Nemesis in the future of this battle. So we're up by 2 tanks, and we've advanced a little bit further forward. I'm going to be outspotted by a lot of things out in the open there in the field, but I'm going to cross this gap once I know that FE 4005 hasn't got a shot on me. And we're going to try and go to the centre here in sort of E5, E6, and try and contest these tanks that are situated in the south of the map. Make room for this enemy friendly G-Saw, I should say, to come up. And then we're going to try and get a shell into one of these tanks in the distance. Got to be a bit careful that machine doesn't pop up. The machine, coincidentally, seems to be a really good player, because as soon as I fire, he does pop up and tries to get his magazine into me here. But I can kind of angle enough to at least bounce 1 or 2 rounds per magazine in my mind, so it's worth firing when I do. I lurch forward, he shoots into our tracks, and then unfortunately for us he does penetrate the remaining 3 rounds, but he's going to be reloading for a while. So I was thinking about going after him, but it's too early on to risk more of my hit points. So I'm going to try and get a shell into one of these tanks in the distance. Could have taken out that Centurion AVRE, but I'm going to decide to go for the damaging blow on that other Centurion AVRE, which is rewarded with a nice damage roll. We sort of come back up, enticing this machine. We did load our third round there for that better reload, so we do a little bit of damage to this machine. Again, he puts some in, but also we absorb a little bit, and it's just a very hard-hitting, quite durable tank destroyer, which is a lot of fun to play. Yeah, it's not worth what they're saying it's worth, but for 50% off, it definitely is worth it, in my opinion, because I like this play style. And now, as we have bided our time, we can come round this corner and hopefully take out this machine who has been pestering us. We don't unfortunately get one into him, but we are going to get a couple of rounds now into this FE 4005, and you'll see me use the third round here, because I don't know how quickly this FE 4005 is going to be taken out, so I want to try and get as much damage in it as possible with the slightly higher DPM and shorter reload that this third round has. And now we're going to try and find a last shell in on this Batchat 25T, and that'll be all she wrote for this game. But it looks like he's going to be taken out. He gets pushed around just as I fire too early, but it doesn't really matter. We still have a very nice game there on Siegfried line in the Nemesis with a victory, finishing in the MVP slot with our cool 3D commander. We finish with a profit with a premium count, but again a loss without. High caliber, mastery badge and Confederate medal. And that 6.6k direct damage, 491 assistance with 4 kills and 1566 base XP. So, in my opinion, this is probably my maybe second favourite of the premium tanks, closely followed by the Reaper's Scythe, which I hopefully have a review coming out soon. That's the tier 8 Warhammer tank, and my favourite's the Cold War Ignis Peratio. But this is still a pretty decent skin, pretty decent tank with a couple of unique features, albeit poorer armour. And I hope that you found this review useful. Thank you all so much for your support. And as I'm leaving you with the rest of some gameplay that I've had in the Nemesis, I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you on the battlefield. Bye for now.